flesh. And he was crucified for our sins and bodily rose from the dead. This is the good message of the Christ. Always believe this. Never deny him. We have been going through our paraphrased apostles' doctrine, as we've been calling it on these Friday nights, and we are in 2 Peter chapter 2. You can see from your handout that we are in verses 4 through 9 tonight. Before we start, Christine, hello. I'm seeing those pictures over there that I believe are works of Tucker. I love those. Well, I guess I'm committed now. They tell me that they have chocolate milk here. So, I'll respond to that the way my wife responded to one of the gifts that I brought to her at one time. Oh, thanks, Elise. So I'll be trying chocolate milk after study today. Have you noticed, anybody noticed this, like within the last year or so, how pastels don't get dirty anymore? Like you can just go out and garden or something, do like yard work, as long as you're wearing some pastel, it never gets dirty. Nobody noticed that? Okay. All right. She must have noticed that, huh? Okay. All right. 2 Peter chapter 2, and beginning at verse 4. For if God didn't spare sinning messengers, but delivered them over to chains of darkness, having confined them to Tartarus, being kept for judgment. Well, this is a long sentence. This is all one sentence today. Let's read it. Let's read it all. Verse 5, and didn't spare the beginning world, but guarded Noah, one of 8, a herald of righteousness, to bring a flood upon the impious world, and burning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, condemned them to an overthrow, having made them an example to those about to be impious, and rescued righteous Lot, who was worn out under the conduct of the lawless in licentiousness. For by what he saw and heard, that righteous one dwelling among them tortured his righteous soul day by day with their lawless works. The Lord knows to be delivering the godly from temptation, but to keep the unrighteous being punished for a day of judgment. And then there's really more to the sentence that is beyond the purview of our pericope this evening. So let's go up to verse 4. For if God didn't spare sinning messengers. All right, now who are these sinning messengers? Well, let's say first that one of the things that we don't have in the LMT. What will you never find in the LMT? What words do you never find in the LMC? Huh? Hell. Angels, who said that? That's here. That's here. Church. Gospel. Later editions, grace. Right. That really sounds bad, doesn't it? I mean, like these big big issues of the faith, and they're not there. They're there, but not the way they have been conventionally translated. Angels is a transliteration. Every time you see it, now it doesn't. Well, let's say that whenever you see the word angels, say in a boy, I can't even say that. I keep starting to say something, and then accuracy arrests me, and I say I can't say that. I'll say most of the time when, say, in a fairly literal conventional translation, or the more literal of our conventional translations, say a New American Standard or a New King James Version or a King James Version, you see angels, most of the time you're not going to be thrown off by that because it's what we think of as an angel is what you're talking about. Sometimes I would say it does kind of throw a proverbial wrench in the machinery, that if we just translated this messengers all the time, because that's what the word means, then we would have learned by this time to know that certain spirit beings are called messengers, and we'd understand that that's angels, like what English has called angels today, but we would just call them messengers. And that's what the word means. Both in Hebrew, malaka, and in Greek, angelos, both of them mean messenger. Usually, our conventional translations will translate such as messenger when it's clear that it's not an angel. Sometimes, though, most notably, I would say in Revelation 2 and 3, that's going to be confusing. How do you think John was supposed to write to an angel? How does he write to an angel? And in chapter 3, with the messenger who has, again, now here's a textual issue to add to it, who in the majority text has a wife named Jezebel. How does that angel have a wife? I submit to you that the messengers that we're talking about in Revelation 2 and 3 are human messengers, the messengers that are coming to John, to Patmos, to make apostolic visits and go back to their respective assemblies. And by the way, Jezebel is not her name. She's like the Old Testament Jezebel in this, that she is manipulating her husband who is in a position of authority. And that said husband is allowing her evil to permeate his overseership. But messenger here, sinning messengers. We are talking about angels in this case. Now, who are these sinning messengers? Well, whoever they are, they were delivered over to chains of darkness. That is, they're confined now in places of darkness, having confined them to Tartarus and being kept for judgment. All right, maybe let's take the second part first, because I think it will help us decipher the first part of that verse. confined them to Tartarus. Confined them to Tartarus. 4 words that we're translating in English. One word in Greek that we need 4 words for. It is there is a Greek word Tartaros. That is the place where in Greek mythology, where the Titans were imprisoned. And the Titans in Greek mythology, the only way I know this is because of this. I don't know Greek mythology, but to study this word, I've learned this Greek mythology. You had the gods, the over gods in Greek mythology, the highest being Zeus. And the Titans, many of them, like hybrids from male or from gods procreating with humans. The offspring, many of those were the Titans. And they were supposed to have sparked an uprising to go against the gods of Olympus. And so the gods of Olympus retaliated, and the Titans were imprisoned. So it becomes a prison for lesser gods because of their rebellion. Now, Peter takes up that Greek word. This is actually the verb form of it. So Tartarus is the noun, the place of this confinement. Tartarao is the Greek word here, which means to confine or consign, to send to Tartarus. Now, obviously, Peter being a Christian and a monotheist, he's not validating the stories of the Greek mythology and the pantheon of their gods. But understand what those gods are. Paul will say it, he echoes the Psalms when it is said in the Psalms that the idols of the nations are demons. Now, you say, what about when Paul would say elsewhere in 1 Corinthians 8-9, in Romans 14, and he'll say that an idol is nothing in the world. Yes, there's 2 senses that we're talking about here. The first sense, there's the more essential sense of it. An idol is nothing in the world. That is, okay, like we've been studying on Wednesday nights. Okay, somebody chops down a tree and they heat their house with the wood of the tree and they cook on it, and then they say, the rest of it, I will make an abomination with it. Like they make an idol of it, and Isaiah is really making fun of idolatry. I mean, God is doing it through Isaiah's words, but he's saying they don't think to say to themselves, I made a roast with it, and I warmed myself with it, and then I made an idol out of it. Like it's the stupidity of idolatry. So now you have a carved image. There's a statue that you've made into the form, as Paul will speak of it in Romans 1. You've carved this thing into the form of a man or some beast or a tetrapod, and you're saying this is a god. Okay, there's no God in that thing. It's not a god. It is actually nothing in the world. Take the various names. In the law, it said that the names of these gods should not even be on our lips. So I don't prefer to use their names. I've mentioned one of them already. We don't need to mention any more false gods, but think of gods, think of gods that, pseudo gods that have these names. I've been to India. I've learned some names of false gods that are there. And it is, even though it is today, even though there is technology, even though, in India, Bangalore, the city of Bangalore, is the technological capital of India. All right, even though you have that situation, you still have idolatry everywhere, and it's as stupid as it ever was. You got and maybe Matthew has gone to India with me, and I don't think anybody else is here who's got. Where's Abigail? No, Abigail's not been to India, but it's had a lot of contact with India, and it's like the guy who is the god of shop owners, who is in the window of every shop. He's a gray-haired, bearded man with a red hoodie on, who always has his hand like this with rays coming out of it. Okay, that's nothing in the world. That's a fiction. That like this shop. If this shop gets struck by lightning, it's not because Mr. Red Hoodie, gray hair, raid hand, is mad at you or in your because you're shop owner or so. And if nothing ever goes wrong, it's not like he smiled on you. He doesn't exist. And just do this, like go that way with every god from every civilization, every false god, every idol that's ever been invented. They don't exist. They're nothing in the world. Don't be afraid of them. However, behind the worship of those fictions, there are idols. Maybe there's, I don't know, maybe in the, and who cares really, but maybe in the unseen realm, there's, I don't know, there's a demon that got a particular penchant for shop owners, and he's the one behind that. I don't know. I don't care. But promoting that idolatry is a particular demon. Okay, so the gods of the nations. Hey, the gods plural of Israel too, when they adopted gods of the nations. They're nothing as far as objective existence, but there are demons who are behind it. So now add to that idea the fact that, okay, nations then in the New Testament world, the nations worshipped these things and were kind of the block of wood or the carved image or the picture or whatever it was that they were worshiping. That thing, worshiping some demon behind that thing, though they're not aware of it, they are worshiping a demon when they do that. And demons I've told you this before, I can't remember when it was. Our archivists could tell you. By the way, who are these mysterious people, the archivists? Well, they're Elise and Rachel and Madeline, and maybe Meta should be part of that too, because she's always just listened to whatever it was that I was talking about. And that's what they did. The archivists listened to every teaching that our assembly has ever put out every day. So, I don't know when I recently, I don't know, probably not so recently, but I don't know when I last talked about this, but the word for, I have this thing, I've told you about this before. I think it was here, actually. I have a book that is a Greek textbook. The Greek textbook, it's just teaching Greek. It's not biblical Greek. It's the only book I have like that. All of my other Greek sources, they're very New Testament. Actually I have two of them, but that are not strictly New Testament Greek. But one of these that goes about teaching Greek. It's an intermediate Greek text, and it's just talking about secular Greek. And when it gives the Greek word for God, it says that it is the New Testament word that we always translate demon. And by the way, it is a transliteration of that word. Daimon is the Greek word, and demon is our English word. Okay, so look, the gods of the nations are demons that are behind them. Now, these then, if Peter can say, and he can, it's what he's doing it without saying it so blatantly as I am now. He's saying there are certain personages, spirit beings, that the world considers gods, and that we know them as demons, and they're in Tartarus. They're not. It's not like, doesn't follow the story of the mythology, but we're using this word to say the place of confinement of what we recognize as demons and what they call gods. So whoever these sinning messengers are, they're confined. They're not the demons that we struggle with, according to Ephesians 6:10. They're not the ones that are plaguing you or I or tempting anybody. Because they're not, Ephesians 2:2. They're not in the atmosphere. They're not in the air. They're not around. They're confined in a place called Tartarus. If we say that demons are messengers that are fallen, I think that's what we've got to conclude. Then we say there are certain fallen angels who are in this place called Tartarus. I do not know where Tartarus is. We don't need to know where Tartarus is. But there are demons who are in this place called Tartarus. Right? And they're confined there, being kept for judgment. This is like what I learned when, for some years, I was a chaplain in the Allegheny County Jail in Pittsburgh. People would be in jail to be held over for sentencing, and once they were sentenced, they would go to prison. This is like demon jail. They're being held there, and it's we can say God knows they're guilty. They're guilty, that's why they're there. We don't need a trial to determine this. They're not considered innocent until found guilty, because God is the one who can find them there. God doesn't need to figure out if they're guilty or innocent. God knows they're guilty. But there's coming a day when they will be thrown into the lake of fire in Revelation chapter 20. Until that day, these ones are kept imprisoned. There are others who are not imprisoned. They are not in heaven now. They're around the earth, but they're active. But these ones are not. All right. Now, this says they're sinning messengers. But aren't all demons sinning messengers? Yeah, they're all sinning messengers. But these are the particular sinning messengers that have been consigned to Tartarus. Now, in the book of Enoch, we don't usually quote that. We don't like read from it. Jude assumes that you will. He assumes that you know that. And so if you've not read through the whole of the scriptures yet, don't read it. But if you have, why don't you read the book of Enoch? But get the whole Bible under your belt first. And therein you have a description of Tartarus as a place of fiery judgment for those particular demons. There's a whole story with Enoch there, but again, you can read that and get a hold of that and read it. And it's nothing. You don't have to fear it. Okay, Jude assumes you've read it. Jude assumes Christians know this book. I can just refer to it, refer to what happened in it. They know what happened in it, though most of us don't today. Okay. In this description, the next thing it says, and didn't spare, this is verse 5, and didn't spare the beginning world, but guarded Noah, one of 8. So there's Noah and his wife. That's one couple. Then he's got 3 sons, and they each have a wife, and that takes you to 8. So Noah and Mrs. Noah. Shem and Mrs. Shem. Ham, Mrs. Ham. Japheth, Mrs. Japheth. Okay, 8 people get saved from the water in 1 Peter, or saved from the world, rather, through the water. And here they're referenced. And before we talk any more about Noah, I want you to see the time connection. Now this is not conclusive. I'm going to give you conclusive in a moment. I just want you to say, once you see conclusive, this will make sense. What will make sense? Why God didn't spare sinning messengers? We still haven't identified these sinning messengers yet. And didn't spare the beginning world. Noah and the flood. I'm going to posit to you that these sinning messengers sinned at the time of Noah. Now, to get further biblical commentary on that, I'm going to have you turn to Jude with me. Now, Jude is, in many places, almost word for word with 2 Peter 2. If you read 2 Peter 2, and then you read Jude, you'll see how similar the content is. But Jude talks in the same kind of reasoning. Look at, begin at verse 5. But I'm desiring to remind you, having known this once, that the Lord, saving a people from the land of Egypt, in the second place destroyed those not believing. Now, this is the beginning of Jude's examples, where he says, you have saved people, and then those saved people get judged. You will note that it does not say that these saved people then lose such salvation. It's just that these saved people get judged for some sin that they've done. So the Exodus generation in 1:5. And, verse 6, messengers. Those not having guarded their principality, but having left their own habitation. What did he do with those messengers who haven't guarded their principality, but have left their own habitation? Well, he has guarded them with everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Now, that's the same stuff that Peter's talking about. What we have in common here is we've got messengers. Peter says they've sinned. Jude tells us how. It's still kind of hazy language, but he says that they didn't guard their own principality, but they left their own habitation. These ones are guarded with everlasting chains, and Peter says that they've been kept, synonym for guarded, in chains of darkness, and then he says here, chains under darkness, everlasting chains under darkness, for the judgment of the great day. In other words, they're kept there until they'll be judged, just like Peter said, right? Now, you get a more exact take on what their sin was in the next verse, though it may not be so evident in English. I've tried to make it evident in English without using excessive verbiage. Verse 7, just as, all right, now there's a word. There's a way to say as in Greek other than this. It's just, like this. This is kathos. This is not as, but in the same way. So just as, just like these messengers, just like Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, in a similar manner to these. They did the same kind of thing as these sinning messengers, having given themselves over to fornication. Okay, so now it's a sexual sin of some kind. It's some kind of illicit sexual behavior. And having gone after different flesh, are exhibited an example undergoing punishment of everlasting fire. All right, now I want to ask you how Sodom and Gomorrah went after different flesh. Well, you might say, well, we get the name of the sin / crime, sodomy, from what they did, from the name of that city, Sodom. And so we're talking about homosexuality. Well, wait a moment. We're not talking about homosexuality, because the problem with the sin of homosexuality is there's too much sameness. It's not that it's different. Something is the same that ought to be different. In other words, natural sexual expression should be directed to an opposite or a different gender. Problem is that homosexuality is the same gender, but it's the same flesh, isn't it? It's human. How is it that those in Sodom and Gomorrah went after different flesh? They went after inhuman flesh. We're not talking about the things we get into as we deeply study the Bible. We're not talking about bestiality here. That would be different flesh, but there's no indication that happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. What happened at Sodom, where Sodomites went after different flesh? They didn't know that it was a different species, if you will, a different race. But when they said to Lot about the two angels that had come to him, that had taken on a human form, and said, bring them out to us that we may know them. All right? They were trying to sexually engage with, they thought they were men because the filthy sodomites were homosexuals. But they thought they were men, but they were angels. These sinning messengers, the ones we're talking about now, went after different flesh by seeking to sexually engage, to become one flesh with humans. We're talking about Genesis 6. If you want to turn in your copy of the scriptures, Genesis 6, you probably you didn't know to bring your green, your forest green Genesis of the LMT that we published some years ago, but here it is. 6:1. And it was that man was caused to begin to abound over the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them. And the sons of God saw the daughters of man, that they were attractive, and they took women for themselves from all whom they chose. Now, remember that there's not a distinct word in Hebrew or in Greek for woman and wife, so you may translate this wives. And Yahweh said, "My spirit won't adjudicate on man into forever." In other words, I'm not going to just keep on judging because I keep on putting up with this sin of man forever. For he is indeed flesh, and his days will be 120 years. There's two places in the scriptures where I think that Christians mistakenly read and come out with what the lifespan of man is supposed to be. This is one of them. That, in these days of Genesis, God was saying humans will live for 120 years. It's not what he's saying, because after this point, and far after, after this point, you do see ages drastically decline. But I think we're talking about the amount of time that it's going to be until man is destroyed off the face of the earth, 120 years. Not that humans will live to roughly 120. The other one is in Psalm 90, when our days are 70 years, or if by strength 80. That's not saying, after the flood and after this time, and like nowadays we live to be about 70, maybe 80 years old. No, we don't. Okay, look, there's one of our number here. I sort of joke with them very, very seldomly, but every once in a while, and they'll tell me, like, in all seriousness, they'll tell me, you've only got about 10 years to live. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Like, they just think like few people, live after 70, and they're not doing it biblically either. And no, okay. What Moses is actually doing in Psalm 90 is complaining. I'm not saying in a bad way. I'm just saying he's complaining that our days are 70 years. Maybe there's a few of us that are stronger. They live to 80. He's talking about the Exodus generation, and he's recounting all of the things that God has brought upon them as a judgment in that generation. He's saying part of God's judgment is we aren't even living till 70. We're living to just about that and dying. Moses dies much older than that. And so it's here, you're not talking about man's going to live until he's 120. We're talking about rather that man's got 120 years left on the earth before I wipe all of them out except 8. Verse 4, the fallen ones were on the earth in those days. Yeah. Angels who had fallen from their holiness, and also after then, when the sons of God were going into the daughters of man, and they bore to them. These were the mighty ones who were from antiquity, the men of name. That is, men of name, that's famous men. I don't believe all of the stories about Hercules, but I think he was one of these. I think legend developed around this guy who was, and what do the myths say he was? Say he was the daughter, he was the son rather, of Zeus and a human wife. I think he was one of these. One of the offspring of fallen angels reproducing with human women. And they would be mighty ones from antiquity, wouldn't they? I mean, one angel in the Book of Kings, originally one book, by the way. I say the Book of Kings. First and Second Kings was originally one book. In the Book of Kings, you have one angel killing 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. Okay, let's say, well, this guy's only half of that. He's half human and he's half angel. So whatever's a half of 185,000, maybe he could kill that many in a night. The idea is these guys were superhuman, literally, in their power. And they made names for themselves. And there was, in the days of Noah, walking on the earth, these hybrid people who were beyond any scale powerful, because they were sons of demons. Verse 5, and Yahweh saw that the evil of man was abundant on the earth, and every formation of the conceptions of his heart, only evil all the day. And the flood account starts here. You see the Nephilim, that's how you transliterate fallen ones here. You see the Nephilim and the flood right next to each other. In 2 Peter now, we're seeing the Nephilim and then the flood right next to each other. You might say, wait a minute, it seems to me that there's some ambiguity around sons of God. Aren't we called sons of God in Galatians 3:26 by faith in the Lord Jesus Christ? Maybe these are the faithful humans of the time of the pre-Diluvian age, that is the pre-flood age. Well, that I understand, and that's not a really bad hermeneutic. It's not. However, it's you're importing a New Testament use of that terminology into the Old Testament, whereas other places in the Old Testament that use that term don't use it of faithful humans. I refer you to Job, and again, I'm using my translation of it, but Job 38. And, God is talking to Job, and he's saying, you're making these pronouncements about me and about how I'm wrong in the way I'm treating you, and you are making grandiose assertions of what justice would be like. And let me ask you, where were you when? And he goes into things that Job can't know, and he wasn't around. And God, basically, you didn't create the universe, did you? And he's putting Job in his place. But he says, where were you in my founding earth? This is Job 38. I'm starting at verse 4. Where were you in my founding earth? Disclose, if you have known understanding. Who set its measures? Because you know. Or who stretched out a measuring line upon it? Or what were its plinths? On what were its plinths sunk? Or who has cast a stone on its corner? Watch this now. In the stars of morning, cheering together, and all the sons of God shouted. At the creation of the earth, then, these sons of God already existed. Because God created angels before he created earth. And when they saw him create the earth, they cheered over it. So you see that spirit beings that we tend to call angels, that the scripture consistently calls messengers, they were there. And now that term is used for these sinning messengers. So that's verse 4. Let's look at our paraphrase of it. Because since God didn't spare sinning angels, but consigned them to restraints in darkness, having confined them to the place of present judgment for the demons who reproduced with women, they being kept there until the eschatological comprehensive judgment. Okay, that's my paraphrase of it. Since you now know why I'm paraphrasing so, because of our having unpacked the literal. Verse 5, and God didn't spare the beginning world, but guarded Noah, one of 8, a herald of righteousness. Why do we call him a herald? You know what a herald is, right? The herald is the guy that in the old, he was an old newsman. It was, and he would go into we kind of have this old English picture of a herald, the guy that goes out into the populated place in the city and says, hear ye, and so the king saith, and he announces for the king. That's a herald. He's a kerux, is the Greek word, and that's exactly what a kerux was. He was the king's proclaimer. Here, Noah is a proclaimer for the king over everything, God. And God would bring a flood upon the impious world. So look at our paraphrase, and neither did he spare the pre-deluge world. Deluge is my word for flood, okay? He didn't spare the pre-deluge world, but protected Noah, one of 8 people, a herald of righteousness, to bring a flood upon the unholy world. It says that's example 2. Example 3 is in verse 6. And burning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, condemned them to an overthrow, having made them an example to those about to be impious. Remember that whatever was written in 1 Corinthians 10 and Romans chapter 15 was written for our teaching, our learning, and this was written so that they would be an example. Look, this is what God feels like toward homosexuality, an abundance of bread, but not sharing it with the poor, and one's arrogance. Combining Ezekiel and Genesis, those are the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Look at our paraphrase. And burning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, condemned them to overthrow, having made them an example of those who would live unholily in the future. Verse 7, literal side, and rescued righteous Lot, who was worn out under the conduct of the lawless in licentiousness. So verses 4 through 6 are, if God judged these people, and at 7 you have a turn, and rescued these people. And so Lot is our first example here. He rescued righteous Lot. Now look, if any of us knew Lot, if Lot were in our church, I don't think Lot would last long in our church. All right. I don't think Lot would probably want to stick around long. Um, Sometimes this has happened. I've always been proved right in this. I've never mentioned this before among you. So look, this is like never mentioned this before. I've always been proved right in this. This happened. This happened recently. Don't overthink it. But somebody, one of our number was very, very upset, very disturbed, and about someone who had started to come to church. And I said, "Listen, this person will not be able to stand our church. You don't have to worry. There's no way they're gonna be here. There's no way they're ever coming back." And this was like one time they came. I said, "There's no way this person's ever coming back," and they've never come back. Okay, I think Lot would have a hard time. I think I might say to Lot, like, "Just don't worry, like he's not coming back." But Lot was called a righteous man. Now, my question is, why is he called a righteous man? It is certainly not his conduct. I don't think you'd want Lot regularly attending church here. All right. Lot is, you know what he did, right? I mean, if you don't read Genesis, read around like 19, 20, 21, like read those verses, read those chapters, right? Why is Lot righteous? Lot is righteous because of one thing and one thing alone: believing on the Lord Jesus Christ, not knowing he was the Lord Jesus Christ, believing in Yahweh. That's why he's righteous. And that makes a person righteous because God would impute a forensic righteousness to everyone who simply believed, made possible from Lot's standpoint about 2,000 years in the future, when God the Son would die and 3 days later rise again from the dead. The righteousness of the Christ was imputed to Lot, but with all of Lot's habitual or experiential unrighteousness, he still wasn't Sodom and Gomorrah. Why is he living there? This is not a good place for you to live, Lot. Do you know, I think that I think it'd be a good choice for some parents to say, I want to live in this geographical location as opposed to another geographical location, just for the sake of their children and what's around them. Now, we're in the world no matter where we are. We understand that. And, the institutions that are around us, they're going to be worldly no matter where you live. But there are places where immoral wickedness is much more marked and will be more aggressive. I think we live in a place where it's not really so. Unless you talk about the outpost of, the cosmic carnal outpost that we called School of Tyrannus over there, okay? But I think that geographically, this is a pretty good place for you to raise children. Lot Why are you choosing Sodom? Why was it that he first pitched his tent outside the gate? Why do we find him in chapter 19 actually inside the gate? Why do we find how much inside the gate Lot was when they said, this one came to be a sojourner and now he would make himself a judge over us? Like, why did he warm up to Sodom and Gomorrah? But listen, belief alone, benevolence, righteousness is why this man is righteous. He was experientially, as far as practice, conduct, conversation, if you want to use an old term, he was far better than Sodom and Gomorrah as far as degrees go, and so he was worn out under the conduct of the lawless. That is, it was like, oh, again, it's like grieving. He's got to see this. Evidently, Sodom and Gomorrah was not private about their sins either, and their lawlessness was in licentiousness. That is, in a mindset that made it that anything goes. There's no standard. That's license to sin, licentiousness. Look at our paraphrase. And delivered righteous Lot, who was wearied by the habitual conduct of those with no morality in licentiousness. Verse 8, an explanation of that. For by what he saw and heard, that righteous one dwelling among them tortured his righteous soul day by day with their lawless works. He was tormented by having to be around them. Like, hey, you don't have to be around them. You can leave this place. But in that he chose to live there, he's confronted by this all the time. Look at our paraphrase. Because by what he observed of their conduct and heard in their speech, that righteous one tormented his own soul by living among them, daily being exposed to their immoral works. All right, so now we've got 4 through 6 and 7 and 8. Like, if God, 4 through 6, if God judges these ones, but spares these ones, Lot is our poster child for that. Then verse 9, the Lord knows to be delivering the godly from temptation, but to keep the unrighteous being punished for a day of judgment. Just like the angels are kept to be punished for a day of judgment, he knows how to do that with humans as well. The Lord knows to be delivering the godly from temptation. That is, God knows that he should do it. It's justice, it's righteousness, it's his holiness, it's his character, it's his nature. He knows to do that, and he knows how to do it. But to keep the unrighteous being punished for a day of judgment. Look at our paraphrase. Then our master knows to be rescuing the pious from solicitation to evil. That's what temptation is. Temptation is the pressure to do evil, and to keep the unrighteous in punishment until his righteous judgment is revealed and vindicated. The one having ears to be hearing, let him be hearing.